Hello there, fellow truth seekers and mystery enthusiasts. Before we dive into tonight's chilling tale, I'd love to know how your day has been treating you. What time is it where you are in the world right now? Are you settling in for the evening, or perhaps it's the middle of the night and you're seeking something to keep you company in the darkness? Wherever you are, from the bustling cities of New York to the quiet countryside of rural England, from the neon-lit streets of Tokyo to the ancient lands of Cairo, you've found your way here to Sleep Theories. If you haven't already, please consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about our world's hidden history. Tonight we journey to the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, where beneath miles of ice and decades of silence something waits in the darkness. Something that suggests the greatest war in human history never truly ended. It simply moved underground. The email arrived at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday in November 2025, landing in Dr. Simon Krell's inbox with the kind of timing that suggested either divine intervention or careful surveillance. Krell, a 43-year-old former Cold War historian turned freelance researcher, had made a career of chasing ghosts through government archives and declassified documents. His apartment in Berlin was a maze of filing cabinets, conspiracy boards, and towers of yellowed papers that most people would consider worthless. To Krell, they were breadcrumbs leading to truths that powerful people preferred to keep buried. The sender's address was encrypted, bouncing through multiple proxy servers before reaching him. The subject line read simply, New Schwabenland, 1945, urgent. Attached was a single scanned document, the paper so aged it appeared ready to crumble at a touch. Krell's German was fluent, a necessity in his line of work, and as he read the decoded SS communique, his hands began to tremble. The document was dated March 15th, 1945, just weeks before Hitler's supposed death in the bunker. It detailed the successful relocation of what it called priority personnel and research materials to coordinates in Queen Maud Land, Antarctica. The signature at the bottom belonged to SS Oberfuhrer Hans Kammler, a man whose disappearance after the war had puzzled historians for decades. But it was the handwritten note clipped to the document that made Krell's blood run cold. Base 211 was real, and it still hums. The accompanying email was brief. Dr. Krell, your research into Operation Paperclip caught our attention. The attached document came from my grandfather's papers. He was a Wehrmacht cryptographer who decoded this message in the final days of the war but never reported it. He said the Americans and Russians were too focused on rocket scientists to notice what else the Nazis were hiding. Find the truth. The world deserves to know. A friend in the archives. Krell printed the document immediately, then saved multiple copies to encrypted drives. In 30 years of research, he had never seen anything quite like this. Base 211 was a legendary Nazi installation rumoured to exist in Antarctica, dismissed by mainstream historians as fantasy. But here was documentation suggesting it was not only real but operational as late as March 1945. He spent the next 72 hours cross-referencing the document's details with existing historical records. The communique mentioned device theta and something called vril research, terms that appeared in fragmentary SS documents but had never been fully explained. Most intriguingly, it referenced the transport of 146 priority personnel via U-boat convoy to the coordinates 71 degrees south, 11 degrees east, deep in the heart of Queen Maud Land. Krell's research had taught him that the most important truths were often hidden in the spaces between official records, the gaps, inconsistencies, the stories that didn't quite add up. And as he dug deeper into the Antarctic mystery, he began to find those gaps everywhere. The trail led Krell to the US National Archives in College Park, Maryland, where he had maintained research privileges since his doctoral work. Flying to Washington felt like stepping back in time. The archives building still smelled like old paper and bureaucratic secrets. Krell requested files on Operation Paperclip, the program that brought Nazi scientists to America after the war. focusing specifically on personnel records from 1945 to 1947. What he found was a masterclass in selective documentation. While the files meticulously tracked prominent figures like Werner von Braun and Walter Dornberger, dozens of lesser-known scientists had gaps in their records during the crucial period between Germany's surrender and their arrival in the United States. The files simply noted location unknown or transit period for months at a time. Even more suspicious were the U-boat records. Krell had researched the German submarine fleet extensively during his academic career, and he knew that several U-boats had surrendered in Argentina months after the war's official end. U-530 arrived in Mar del Plata on July 10th, 1945, nearly 2 months after Germany's surrender. U-977 followed on August 17th. Both crews claimed they had been hiding in the South Atlantic, afraid to surrender, but their stories contained inconsistencies that Allied intelligence had apparently chosen to ignore. The captain of U-530, Otto Vermuth, had been interrogated extensively, but those transcripts remained classified. Krell could only access a summary that noted subject provided contradictory statements regarding vessels' activities between May and July 1945. More telling was a note in U-977's file. Vessels' fuel consumption patterns inconsistent with claimed route. Possible undisclosed stops in Southern Ocean. Krell's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching in a Berlin archive, he discovered the contact information for Alina Dorn, daughter of former Wehrmacht cryptographer Wilhelm Dorn. Now 78 and living in a small apartment in Munich, Alina had spent decades trying to understand her father's war experience. When Krell called her, she was initially suspicious. Too many sensationalist writers had contacted her over the years, seeking dramatic stories about Nazi conspiracies. But something in Krell's methodical approach and detailed knowledge convinced her to meet. They sat in her small kitchen, surrounded by her father's papers and photographs. Wilhelm Dorn had been a communications specialist assigned to intercepting Allied transmissions, but in the war's final weeks, he had also decoded German messages, including some that were never supposed to reach higher command. "My father carried a terrible burden," Alina said, pouring tea with hands that shook slightly. He decoded many messages in those last days, but one haunted him until his death. It spoke of continuation, of plans that extended beyond Germany's defeat. She handed Krell a faded transcript in her father's handwriting. It was dated April 30th, 1945, the day Hitler supposedly died in his bunker. The message was fragmentary but clear enough. Southern installation operational. Package delivered successfully, awaiting further personnel transfer. "What did your father think it meant?" Krell asked. Alina's eyes grew distant. 3 days before he died, when the cancer had made him delirious, he grabbed my hand and said something I'll never forget. The war never ended, Alina. It moved beneath the ice. They're still down there waiting. Back in his Berlin apartment, Krell spread the evidence across his main research table like pieces of a vast, dark puzzle. The Nazi documents, the U-boat records, Wilhelm Dorn's transcripts, they all pointed toward Antarctica. But if there had been a secret Nazi base there, surely the Allies would have discovered it eventually. That thought led him to Operation High Jump, the massive US Navy expedition to Antarctica, led by Admiral Richard Byrd in 1946-47. Officially, High Jump was described as a training exercise and scientific expedition, but the scale seemed enormous for such purposes. 13 ships, 4,700 personnel, and enough supplies for an 8-month deployment. Krell had researched Byrd briefly during his graduate work, but now he dove deep into the Admiral's post-war activities. What he found was a pattern of contradictions and unexplained early terminations. Operation High Jump was planned to last 8 months, but was cut short after just 10 weeks. The official reason was weather conditions, but Krell found evidence that the expedition had faced the mildest Antarctic summer in recent memory. More intriguing was Byrd's behaviour after returning from Antarctica. The Admiral, normally gregarious with the press, became oddly reticent about the expedition's discoveries. But in one interview with a Chilean newspaper, El Mercurio, published on March the 5th, 1947, Byrd made a statement that had puzzled researchers for decades. "I can assure you that America must now prepare itself for the eventuality that the country will be attacked by flying objects that can fly from pole to pole at incredible speed." What could have prompted such a bizarre warning from a respected naval officer? Krell submitted a Freedom of Information Act request for Operation High Jump records, knowing it would take months to process. But his contacts in the research community proved valuable. Dr. Sarah Chen, a historian at the Naval War College, had been studying Cold War military operations and had obtained partial high jump files through her own FOIA requests. The after-action reports are heavily redacted, she told Krell during a Skype call, but there are references to unidentified aerial phenomena and at least one incident involving the loss of an aircraft under circumstances described as impossible according to known physics. She forwarded him what she had, fragments of reports that painted a picture of an expedition that encountered far more than weather and wildlife. One partially legible entry described metallic object emerging from ice ridge approximately 0800 hours, and craft demonstrated flight characteristics inconsistent with known technology. Most chilling was a note that one Navy aircraft had been destroyed by unknown forces, no evidence of conventional weapons fire. Krell cross-referenced these reports with personnel records and found that several high jump participants had been reassigned to classified projects immediately after returning from Antarctica. Some had their security clearances elevated, others were quietly transferred to remote postings. The pattern suggested a deliberate effort to scatter the expedition's witnesses across the military bureaucracy. But one name kept appearing in the margins of various reports: Commander James Morrison, who had served as Byrd's intelligence liaison during high jump. Morrison had retired from the Navy in 1950 and spent his final years writing what were dismissed as science fiction novels. Krell ordered Morrison's books and found them filled with detailed descriptions of underground Nazi installations and advanced aircraft technology. Most dismissed them as fantasy, but Krell recognised elements that matched the SS documents he'd received. Morrison's final novel, published posthumously in 1974, included a dedication that made Krell's skin crawl. To those who went beneath the ice and never returned, and to those who stayed behind to guard secrets that must someday be revealed. Getting to Antarctica legally would have required months of bureaucratic navigation, scientific justification, and international permits. Krell didn't have months, and his research had convinced him that official channels would likely be monitored by people who preferred that certain secrets remain buried. Instead, he contacted Jakob Reich, the Norwegian glaciologist he had met at a conference on climate change in 2019. Reich was respected in academic circles, but had a reputation for bending rules when scientific curiosity demanded it. More importantly, he had access to research stations in Queen Maud Land and a network of contacts who could arrange unofficial transportation. "You understand this is completely illegal," Reich said during their encrypted video call. "If we're caught, both our careers are finished, and that's assuming we don't die in the ice." "The coordinates in these documents," Krell replied, showing him the Nazi communique on camera. "How far are they from the Norwegian research stations?" Reich studied the numbers, cross-referencing them with his geological surveys. "About 40 kilometres from Troll Station. It's in a region we've mapped for ice density but never excavated. Very stable ice formations, perfect for..." He paused, understanding dawning in his eyes. Perfect for hiding something underground. They spent 2 weeks planning the expedition. Reich would submit a routine geological survey request, using his credentials to arrange transport to Troll Station. From there, they would take a small research vehicle to the coordinates, ostensibly to collect ice core samples. If the Nazi documents were accurate, they should find evidence of the entrance to Base 211 within a few hundred metres of the specified location. The flight to Antarctica was surreal. Krell pressed his face to the aircraft window as they flew over the endless white expanse, trying to imagine Nazi U-boats navigating these frozen waters in 1945. The logistics alone seemed impossible, yet here was documented evidence that it had happened. Troll Station was a cluster of modern buildings rising from the ice like a technological oasis. Reich introduced Krell as a climate researcher studying historical ice formations, and the station personnel accepted the cover story without question. Within 24 hours they were travelling across the ice in a modified snowcat, following GPS coordinates toward their destination. The landscape was hypnotically monotonous, endless white broken only by the occasional ice ridge or crevasse. But as they approached the coordinates from the Nazi document, the terrain began to change. The ice here was different, formed in unnatural patterns that suggested human intervention decades earlier. "There," Reich said, pointing toward a slight depression in the ice about a kilometre ahead. "That's not natural formation. Something was built there and then covered." They parked the snowcat and began scanning with ground-penetrating radar. Within an hour they had found it. A shaft carved into the ice, sealed but clearly artificial. Using thermal lance equipment supposedly meant for ice core sampling, they began cutting through the seal. The opening they created was barely wide enough for a person, but it led downward into perfect darkness. Krell rappelled down first, his headlamp beam revealing carved ice walls that showed tool marks from the 1940s. After 30 metres, the shaft opened into a vast underground chamber. What they found defied belief. The chamber was enormous, easily the size of an aircraft hangar, carved from the living ice, and reinforced with steel beams that still bore SS markings. Along the walls stood rows of rusted machinery, most of it unidentifiable but clearly sophisticated for its era. Workbenches held blueprints and technical drawings, many featuring disc-shaped aircraft labelled with German text. "Hanabu 4, Krell read from one of the clearer blueprints. "Look at these specifications. This is describing an aircraft with flight characteristics that shouldn't have been possible in 1945. Deeper in the complex they found living quarters, still furnished with Nazi banners and propaganda posters. A communications room contained radio equipment and codebooks, suggesting the base had maintained contact with the outside world long after Germany's surrender. Most of the equipment was frozen and corroded beyond use, but the preservation was remarkable. It was in the deepest chamber that they found the most unsettling discovery. The room was circular, with concentric rings carved into the floor around a central platform. Strange symbols covered the walls, some recognisably German, others unlike anything Krell had seen before. Equipment surrounded the platform, much of it more advanced than anything else in the facility, and at the centre of it all was a device that defied description. It was roughly spherical, about 2 metres in diameter, made of a metal that seemed to absorb their flashlight beams. Cables ran from it to various control panels, and despite having been abandoned for decades, the device emitted a faint humming sound and pulsed with an almost imperceptible blue light. "This is still active," Reich whispered, his voice echoing in the chamber. "After all these years, it's still running." Krell approached the device carefully, noting the combination of Nazi engineering and something else, symbols and design elements that seemed far older than the Third Reich. The blueprints scattered around the chamber referred to vril energy and zero-point extraction, terms that appeared in fringe Nazi research but had never been fully explained by historians. They were so absorbed in documenting their discoveries that they almost missed the soft footsteps echoing from the entrance shaft. The armed men who descended into the chamber moved with professional precision, their faces hidden behind tactical masks and night vision goggles. Krell and Reich found themselves surrounded before they could react, the barrels of automatic weapons trained on them with unwavering steadiness. "Dr. Simon Krell," one of the figures said in accented English, "we have been monitoring your research activities. You have displayed remarkable persistence." They were escorted deeper into the complex through passages that Krell and Reich hadn't discovered during their initial exploration. The facility was far larger than they had imagined, extending through multiple levels carved into the ice. Some sections showed signs of recent maintenance, with modern lighting and climate control systems keeping key areas functional. They were brought to what appeared to be a command centre, where an elderly man sat behind a desk studying their confiscated camera equipment. He was perhaps 75, with pale blue eyes and silver hair, wearing a simple grey uniform without insignia. When he spoke, his English was perfect but carried the unmistakable accent of pre-war Germany. "I am Anton Vogel," he said, gesturing for them to sit in metal chairs facing his desk. "I apologise for the dramatic reception, but unauthorised visitors to this facility present certain security concerns." "This place has been abandoned for decades," Krell said, trying to keep his voice steady. "What security concerns?" Vogel smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Abandoned? Dr. Krell, I was born in this facility in 1951. My father was Hans Kammler's chief engineer. This installation has been continuously occupied since its establishment in 1943. The revelation hit Krell like a physical blow. "That's impossible. The war ended in 1945. The war as the world understood it ended in 1945, Vogel corrected. But you have discovered the reality that historians prefer to ignore. A significant portion of the SS leadership, along with our most advanced research programs, were relocated here before Berlin fell. The plan was to wait out the chaos of the post-war period and emerge when conditions were favourable for the Reich's continuation." Rice found his voice. "But it's been 80 years. What happened?" Vogel's expression grew melancholy. "Reality, Mr. Rice. The polar environment proved more challenging than anticipated. The Vril devices that powered our facility suffered a catastrophic failure in 1962. Most of the original personnel died in the subsequent reactor breach. Those who survived faced a choice: remain and slowly die in isolation, or leave and attempt to integrate into the outside world." "And you chose to stay?" "Someone had to maintain the installation, to preserve the records and research, to ensure that when the time was right the knowledge could be retrieved." Vogel stood and walked to a bank of monitors showing various sections of the complex. "But I am the last permanent resident. The others left years ago." "Left to where?" Krell demanded. Vogel's smile returned, colder this time. "Into your world, Doctor Krell. The technology you discovered here did not remain buried. Much of what your modern world considers cutting-edge innovation has far older origins than you might suspect." He led them to another chamber, this one filled with modern computer equipment and communication arrays. Multiple screens showed news feeds from around the world, stock market data, and what appeared to be surveillance footage from major cities. "The surviving members of our community have been quite successful in their integration," Vogel continued. "Aerospace companies, technology corporations, government research facilities, they have excelled in many fields. After all, they had a considerable head start in certain areas of development." The implications of his words were staggering. Krell thought of the mysterious gaps in Operation Paperclip records, the Nazi scientists whose locations had been unknown for months or years after the war. "You're saying that Nazi technology has been influencing modern development?" "Nazi technology," Vogel laughed. "Dr. Krell, what we discovered here was far older than the Reich. The symbols you saw in the Vril chamber, they predate human civilization. We simply learned to harness forces that have existed since the dawn of time." He showed them photographs and documents spanning decades, images of disc-shaped aircraft that looked remarkably similar to modern UFO sightings, technical specifications for propulsion systems that seemed to defy conventional physics, personnel files showing individuals with German names occupying key positions in aerospace and technology companies around the world. "But the most important truth," Vogel said, "is that we never intended to remain hidden forever. This facility was designed as a repository, a seed bank for knowledge that would eventually be released when humanity was ready to receive it." "And when will that be?" Rice asked. Vogel studied them both carefully. "Perhaps sooner than you think. Your presence here suggests that someone with access to our wartime communications, believes that time has come. He handed Krell a small metallic device, no larger than a smartphone. This contains a complete record of our research, including the locations of other installations that were established during the Reich's final years. Greenland, Patagonia, the Gobi Desert. We were more thorough in our preparations than history records. Why are you giving this to me? Because the world is entering a period of unprecedented technological acceleration. Artificial intelligence, quantum computing, aerospace development. These fields are advancing so rapidly that humanity may soon uncover our secrets whether we reveal them or not. It is better that the truth emerges from legitimate academic research than from military intelligence agencies. Vogel escorted them back through the complex, pointing out details they had missed during their initial exploration. The facility was indeed vast, with sections extending deep into the ice. Some areas remained sealed, their contents too dangerous to access without proper precautions. The device you observed in the Vril chamber, he explained, is a power source that taps into what your modern physicists call zero-point energy. It has been running continuously since 1944, requiring no fuel or maintenance. The technology could revolutionize your civilization, or destroy it if misused. As they reached the entrance shaft, Vogel handed them additional equipment, oxygen masks and a small device that he attached to Krell's wrist. The compound I am about to administer will temporarily suppress your short-term memory formation. You will remember this facility, but the specific details of its location and our conversation will fade over the next few weeks. This is for your protection as much as ours. Wait, Krell protested, but Vogel had already activated the device on his wrist. A sharp pinprick followed by a sensation of floating detachment. The memory suppression is not permanent, Vogel's voice seemed to come from a great distance. When the time is right, when the world is ready for these revelations, the suppression will fade. Consider it a temporal lock, ensuring the information emerges at the proper moment. The last thing Krell remembered clearly was climbing up the shaft toward the surface, Reich helping him navigate the ropes with hands that felt strangely numb. Krell woke up in his Berlin apartment 6 weeks later with a splitting headache and gaps in his memory that felt like missing teeth. His research notes from the Antarctic expedition were scattered across his desk, but many of the details seemed frustratingly vague. He remembered finding the base, remembered the Nazi equipment and the strange circular chamber, but the specifics kept slipping away when he tried to focus on them. Reich was experiencing similar problems. During their debriefing calls, both men struggled to reconstruct exactly what they had discovered. They had photographs and video recordings of the facility, clear evidence of its existence, but the deeper implications of their discovery remained maddeningly elusive. It's like trying to remember a dream, Reich said during one of their conversations. I know we found something important, something that changes everything, but the details keep dissolving. Krell threw himself into research, trying to piece together the fragments of his Antarctic experience with his broader investigation into Nazi survival theories. He published a preliminary paper on the discovery of Base 211, but without the specific technological details that had been suppressed, it read more like speculative fiction than serious historical analysis. The breakthrough came 3 months later, in the form of nightmares. They started as vague dreams of underground chambers and humming machinery, but gradually became more specific. Krell found himself dreaming of the circular chamber in the base, of the strange device at its centre, of Vogel's cold smile as he explained the truth about Nazi survival. He began keeping a dream journal, recording every detail he could remember upon waking. It was while reviewing these journal entries that he noticed the symbols. Scattered throughout his notes were sketches of designs he didn't remember drawing. Complex geometric patterns, equations written in notation he didn't recognize, and most importantly, rough maps showing locations around the world. As he studied these unconscious creations, memories began filtering back, not complete recollections, but fragments of his conversation with Vogel. The memory suppression compound was wearing off, just as Vogel had promised. Krell spread the dream maps across his research table, cross-referencing them with his original Nazi documents and geological surveys. The patterns were clear: installations in Greenland near the Thule Air Base, hidden facilities in the Patagonian ice fields, and something large buried beneath the Gobi Desert in Mongolia. Each location corresponded to areas that had been visited by Nazi expeditions in the years before World War II. The Ahnenerbe, Himmler's occult research organisation, had sent teams to these remote regions supposedly searching for evidence of ancient Aryan civilizations. But what if they had been doing more than archaeological research? The metallic device Vogel had given him was still in his possession, though for months it had seemed like nothing more than an unusually dense paperweight. But as his memories returned, he began to understand its significance. Late one night, working alone in his apartment, he activated the device using a sequence of touches that felt familiar, despite his conscious mind not remembering how he knew them. The device projected a holographic display showing a three-dimensional map of the world. Dozens of locations were marked with pulsing points of light, indicating active installations. Most were in remote areas, Arctic regions, mountain ranges, deep deserts, but some were disturbingly close to major population centres. A data stream accompanied the display, showing personnel movements, technological transfers, and what appeared to be a coordinated network of influence spanning governments, corporations and research institutions worldwide. Names appeared that Krell recognised from his research into Operation Paperclip and its aftermath, but these individuals were listed as active operatives as recently as 2024. The scope of the revelation was overwhelming. The Nazi survival in Antarctica hadn't been an isolated pocket of resistance. It had been the coordination point for a global network that had been quietly influencing world events for 8 decades. Krell's hands shook as he copied the data onto encrypted drives. This was more than historical curiosity. It was evidence of an ongoing conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of modern civilization. But it was also incredibly dangerous knowledge. If Vogel was telling the truth about the network's reach and influence, exposing it prematurely could have catastrophic consequences. He thought about Vogel's warning that the world might soon uncover these secrets regardless of his actions. The rapid advancement of technology, the increasing sophistication of satellite surveillance, the democratization of information through the internet, all of these factors made long-term secrecy increasingly difficult to maintain. Perhaps that was why Vogel had chosen to reveal the truth to an academic researcher, rather than a government agency. Independent historians might be better positioned to release information gradually, allowing society to adapt rather than panic. Krell began planning his next move. The device contained location data for dozens of installations, but visiting them all would require resources and legitimacy that he currently lacked. He needed allies, other researchers who could investigate different locations simultaneously, building a comprehensive picture of the network's scope before anyone could suppress their findings. But first, he had to decide whether humanity was ready for the truth about what had been hiding beneath the ice for the past 80 years. As he sat in his apartment, surrounded by evidence of the most significant historical conspiracy ever uncovered, Krell recorded his final thoughts in his research journal. The Third Reich may have fallen in Berlin in 1945, but what it discovered in the years before its defeat, what it preserved in the frozen wasteland of Antarctica, has been quietly reshaping our world ever since. The technology in our pockets, the aircraft in our skies, the very trajectory of human development over the past 8 decades may owe more to Nazi research than we ever imagined. But perhaps more disturbing is the possibility that the Nazis themselves were not the originators of this knowledge. Vogel spoke of forces and technologies that predated human civilization. If he was telling the truth, then we're not just dealing with the survival of a political ideology, but with the recovery of ancient knowledge that could either elevate humanity to unprecedented heights or destroy us entirely. The memory suppression is fully fading now. I remember everything. Vogel's face, the humming of the Vril device, the maps showing installations across the globe. The question is no longer whether this network exists, but how to expose it without triggering catastrophic consequences. The war never ended. It simply moved beneath the ice, and now it's emerging into the light of day. What rises from that frozen darkness may determine the future of human civilization itself. Krell closed the journal and looked out his window at the lights of Berlin, wondering how many of the technologies illuminating the city had their true origins in the frozen chambers beneath Antarctica. The truth was surfacing, just as Vogel had predicted. The only question was whether the world was ready to accept what had been hiding in the shadows for the past 80 years. In the distance, an aircraft passed overhead, its lights blinking in perfect formation against the night sky. Krell watched it disappear into the darkness and wondered if he was looking at technology that had first taken flight in the secret hangars of Base 211, decades before the world was ready to understand what it was witnessing. The last Reich had not ended with Hitler's death in a Berlin bunker. It had simply gone underground, beneath the ice, waiting for the right moment to emerge. And that moment, Krell realized with growing certainty, was rapidly approaching. The secrets beneath the ice were stirring, and soon the world would have to confront the truth about what had been waiting in the frozen darkness all these years. The Reich had not died. It had simply learned to adapt, to evolve, to influence from the shadows. But shadows cannot hide forever, and the light of revelation was beginning to penetrate even the deepest underground chambers. What would emerge from that light remained to be seen, but one thing was certain. The world would never be the same once the truth about the last Reich finally came to the surface. 6 months after his return from Antarctica, Krell received a phone call that changed everything. The voice on the other end was synthesized, digitally altered beyond recognition, but the words were crystal clear. Dr. Krell, we know what you discovered beneath the ice. We know about the device Vogel gave you, and we know you've been mapping our installations. It's time we met. The meeting was arranged for midnight at the Brandenburg Gate, a location so public that violence seemed impossible. Krell arrived early, watching the tourists and late-night revellers pass by the iconic monument. At exactly midnight, a woman approached him, mid-40s, professionally dressed with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "I am Dr. Elizabeth Weber," she said in perfect English with only the faintest hint of a German accent. "I represent what you might call the administrative council of the network you've been investigating." "The Nazi network," Krell said bluntly. Weber smiled, but it was neither warm nor cold, simply professional. "That terminology is outdated, Doctor. Krell. What began as a survival mechanism for Reich personnel has evolved into something far more sophisticated. We prefer to think of ourselves as custodians of advanced knowledge." She handed him a tablet displaying a news article dated that very day. Breakthrough in quantum propulsion technology promises revolutionary advances in space travel. The article featured Dr. Hans Müller, a physicist at the European Space Agency, whose biography showed he had been born in Argentina in 1952. Dr. Müller's grandparents were part of the original Antarctic expedition, Weber explained. The propulsion technology he invented has been in our archives since 1944. We've been gradually releasing such innovations when we determine humanity is ready for them. Krell stared at the article, his mind racing. How many others? Hundreds, perhaps thousands. Not all of them know their true heritage, of course. Many are simply brilliant individuals who happen to be hired by companies we influence, working on projects guided by principles they believe they discovered independently. Weber began walking along the path beside the monument, and Krell fell into step beside her. The network operates on a simple principle. Technological advancement must be managed to prevent catastrophic misuse. Your species has a remarkable capacity for turning any discovery into a weapon. And you appointed yourselves as guardians of human progress. Someone had to, Weber replied matter-of-factly. The alternative was allowing uncontrolled development of technologies that could have destroyed civilization decades ago. The Vril devices alone, if released prematurely, could have triggered conflicts that would have made your world wars look like minor skirmishes. They stopped beneath a streetlight, and Weber activated her own tablet, showing Krell a series of satellite images. These are the installations you've identified using Vogel's device. What you don't realise is that they're all connected through a quantum communication network that allows instantaneous coordination across the globe. The images showed the locations Krell had mapped, but with additional details visible through advanced imaging techniques. Each site appeared to be far larger than he had estimated, with underground complexes extending for kilometres beneath the surface. The Greenland facility houses our climate management systems, Weber continued. The Patagonian installation focuses on biological research and preservation. The Gobi Desert complex serves as our primary manufacturing centre for advanced materials, and Antarctica remains our central coordination hub. Climate management? Krell's voice was barely a whisper. Doctor. Krell, what do you think has prevented your planet from experiencing runaway greenhouse effects despite 8 decades of industrial expansion? Pure luck. The climate systems we've deployed have been quietly regulating atmospheric conditions, buying your species time to develop sustainable technologies. The implications were staggering. If Weber was telling the truth, the network hadn't just been influencing technological development, they had been actively managing planetary systems to prevent environmental collapse. But why reveal this to me? Krell asked. Why not just continue operating in secret? Weber's expression grew serious. Because the secrecy is becoming impossible to maintain. Satellite surveillance, artificial intelligence, global communication networks. Your own technological advancement is approaching the point where our activities will be detected regardless of our precautions. She showed him another series of images, these depicting modern facilities around the world. We estimate we have perhaps 5 years before independent researchers or government agencies uncover our operations through conventional means. It's better that the revelation comes from legitimate academic sources than from military intelligence agencies. What do you want from me? Help us manage the disclosure, Weber said. Your reputation as a historian gives you credibility that our own people lack. We need someone to serve as an intermediary, to help humanity adjust to the reality of our existence without triggering panic or conflict. Krell thought about Vogel's words in the Antarctic base, about the temporal lock that had been placed on his memories. This was planned from the beginning, wasn't it? Vogel knew you would contact me. Anton has always been forward-thinking, Weber admitted. He believed that eventually we would need allies outside the network to help bridge the gap between our world and yours. She handed him a card with only a phone number printed on it. Think about our offer, Doctor. Krell. But don't take too long. Events are accelerating faster than we anticipated. As Weber turned to leave, Krell called after her. The ancient technology you mentioned. The knowledge that predates human civilization. What is it really? Weber paused, looking back at him with an expression that might have been pity. That, Doctor. Krell, is a conversation for another time. Humanity isn't ready for those revelations yet, but when you are, we'll be here to guide you through them. She disappeared into the shadows beyond the monument, leaving Krell alone with questions that would haunt his dreams for weeks to come. Krell returned to his apartment and opened his research journal one last time. As he wrote, he could hear aircraft passing overhead with increasing frequency, their flight patterns suggesting technologies that conventional aviation couldn't explain. The choice before me is clear but terrifying, he wrote. I can expose the network immediately, revealing the truth about 80 years of hidden influence and risking global chaos. Or I can become part of their disclosure process, helping to manage humanity's introduction to realities that will fundamentally change our understanding of history, technology, and our place in the universe. Weber spoke of knowledge that predates human civilization, of technologies so advanced that they could either elevate us or destroy us. The network has been serving as a buffer, gradually introducing innovations while preventing catastrophic misuse. But that protection comes at the cost of truth, of humanity's right to make its own choices about its future. I think of Vogel, alone in his Antarctic fortress, maintaining systems that have been running since before I was born. I think of the thousands of people working in technology companies around the world, unknowingly implementing designs created in underground laboratories decades ago. I think of the climate system supposedly protecting our planet from environmental collapse. If the network is telling the truth, then everything we think we know about the past 80 years of human progress is a carefully managed illusion. Our greatest achievements may be nothing more than the controlled release of knowledge that has been waiting in frozen vaults since the darkest days of the 20th century. But perhaps most disturbing is the possibility that this is just the beginning. Weber's mention of pre-human knowledge suggests that the Nazi discoverers were themselves based on something far older and more mysterious. We may be approaching not just a revelation about recent history, but a fundamental rewriting of human understanding about our origins and destiny. The Third Reich may have fallen, but what it found beneath the ice is still rising, and soon, very soon, the world will have to confront the reality that we have never been alone in shaping our own future. The war never ended. It simply evolved into something we're only beginning to understand, and whether that evolution leads to humanity's elevation or its destruction may depend on choices we're about to be forced to make. The secrets beneath the ice are no longer content to remain hidden. They're coming to the surface, and when they fully emerge, nothing will ever be the same again. Krell closed the journal and looked out at the Berlin skyline, where strange lights moved among the stars with purpose and intelligence that defied conventional explanation. The last Reich was no longer hiding in the shadows. It was preparing to step into the light, and humanity was about to discover that its greatest challenge wasn't in the past, but in the future that was rapidly approaching. The humming beneath the ice had become a roar that could no longer be ignored. The question was no longer whether the truth would emerge, but whether the world would survive its revelation. In the distance, the lights continued their silent dance across the night sky, heralds of a new age that was about to dawn. An age when humanity would finally learn what had been waiting in the frozen darkness all these years, and what price they would have to pay for the knowledge that was about to be unleashed upon the world. The last Reich was rising, and its emergence would mark the beginning of a new chapter in human history, one that would make all previous conflicts and discoveries seem like mere preparation for what was to come. Thank you for joining us for this journey into the frozen mysteries of our hidden history. If you enjoyed this exploration of what might be waiting beneath the ice, please remember to subscribe to Sleep Theories for more stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about our world. Until next time, sleep well, but perhaps keep one eye on the sky, watching for lights that move with purpose beyond our understanding. The truth is out there, waiting in the cold and darkness, and it's closer than you think. Hello there, digital wanderer. Before we dive into this tale of silicon deception and algorithmic nightmares, tell me, how was your day? What time is it where you are right now? Are you reading this from a bustling city, a quiet suburb, or perhaps somewhere in between? Wherever you are in this vast interconnected world, I hope you'll consider subscribing to Sleep Theories for more stories that blur the line between digital paranoia and uncomfortable truth. Let me know, do you believe the dead internet theory is already in full effect or maybe just beginning? Also, don't forget to let me know what conspiracy theories you want to see videos on next. Now let's begin. Callum Breyer's apartment smelled like cold coffee and electronic dust. 3 monitors hummed in the darkness, casting blue light across his stubbled face as he scrolled through endless data streams. It was 2:47 a.m, and he was deep into what his former colleagues at Nexus Social would have called the rabbit hole, that dangerous territory where pattern recognition became obsession. He'd been freelancing for 8 months now, ever since he'd been quietly let go from his position as a behavioural algorithm auditor. The official reason was restructuring. The real reason was that he'd started asking too many questions about engagement metrics that didn't make sense. Tonight's client was a mid-tier marketing firm wanting to understand YouTube engagement patterns across different demographics. Standard work, easy money. But as Callum pulled the data, something caught his eye. A cluster of comments appeared across dozens of channels. Gaming, cooking, political commentary, meditation videos. All different creators, different countries, different languages. But the comments were identical, save for minor spelling variations. This is so inspiring, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us all. This is so inspiring, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us all. This is so inspiring, thank you for sharing your wisdom with us all. 12 different accounts, posted exactly on the hour, every hour for the past 3 days. Callum leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking. He'd seen bot networks before, crude operations that spammed promotional content or manipulated view counts. But this was different. These comments were contextually appropriate, emotionally resonant. They felt human. He opened a new tab and began tracing the accounts. User profiles looked authentic. Profile pictures of smiling faces, bio information, posting histories going back months. But as he dug deeper, patterns emerged. The same cadence in writing style, the same emotional beats, the same subtle grammatical quirks. His fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, pulling engagement data from the past 6 months. The numbers told a story that made his stomach drop. These weren't isolated incidents. Across every platform he checked, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, the same phantom engagement appeared like digital ghosts. At 3:15 a.m, Callum decided to test his theory. He replied to one of the suspicious comments with a specific phrase, "The sparrows sing at midnight in the digital garden." It was code he'd developed during his time at Nexus Social, a way to identify automated responses versus human ones. Real people would ignore it, ask what it meant or engage with curiosity. Bots typically responded with generic acknowledgements or ignored it entirely. He waited. Hours passed. The sun rose. Coffee grew cold. By evening he'd received no responses to his test phrase across any platform. Not one. But that wasn't the unsettling part. The unsettling part was that every other comment thread continued as normal. Conversations flowed. People shared stories, asked questions, made jokes. The digital world hummed with apparent human activity. Except none of it was real. Callum stared at his screens, a creeping realization washing over him. If these accounts weren't human, and if they represented such a significant portion of online engagement, then what percentage of the internet was actually authentic? He opened a new document and began typing Day 1. Discovered coordinated, inauthentic behaviour across multiple platforms. Scale appears larger than any known bot network. Testing indicates 0 human responses to verification attempts. Beginning comprehensive analysis. He saved the file as ghostclicksresearch.txt and encrypted it with a password only he knew. Outside his window, the city hummed with life. Real life. but inside his apartment, surrounded by the glow of his monitors, Callum felt like he was staring into a digital void that stared back. 3 days later, Callum's research had expanded into something that consumed every waking moment. He'd identified patterns across 17 different platforms, traced IP addresses through proxy networks, and documented engagement anomalies that suggested the problem was far more widespread than he'd initially thought. The breakthrough came while scrolling through Reddit at 4 a.m. A post in r/conspiracy caught his attention. Anyone else feel like they're the only human left online? The post had 0 upvotes, but thousands of comments. What made it strange was that every single comment showed as coming from a deleted user account. Thread after thread of deleted responding to deleted, creating ghostly conversations that felt like digital archaeology. But buried deep in the collapsed comments, Callum found something different. A reply that hadn't been deleted, posted by a user called truthseeker_404. Look for the edit history on the Wikipedia page for Dead Internet Theory, 3rd revision from March 2019. The DNS key is hidden in the false citation. Callum's pulse quickened. He'd heard whispers of dead internet theory during his time at Nexus Social, a fringe concept that suggested large portions of the internet had been taken over by artificial intelligence. Most dismissed it as paranoid speculation, but after 3 days of documenting phantom engagement, paranoid speculation was starting to look like uncomfortable possibility. He navigated to the Wikipedia page and dove into the edit history. March 2019, 3rd revision. The changes were minor. A few grammatical corrections, updated statistics, and a new citation that led to a non-existent academic paper. But embedded in the citation's URL was a string of characters that looked like random gibberish. Callum copied the string and ran it through various decoding methods. Base 64, hexadecimal, Caesar cipher. Nothing worked until he tried treating it as a DNS lookup. The result was a domain that didn't appear in any standard search, trueline.onion, a Tor address. Callum had used Tor before, back in his university days when digital privacy felt like an intellectual exercise rather than a survival necessity. Now, as he booted up the Tor browser and navigated to the hidden address, it felt like stepping through a doorway into a parallel internet. The site was minimal, white background, black text, no graphics. Just a simple message board with a handful of active threads. But the conversations happening there were unlike anything he'd seen online in years. Real people discussing real things. No copy-paste responses, no algorithmic engagement, no advertising. Just human beings trying to make sense of a digital world that had become increasingly incomprehensible. The most active thread was titled Documentation Project, Mapping the Artificial Web. Callum clicked through and found a collaborative spreadsheet tracking inauthentic behaviour across hundreds of websites. The data was methodical, thorough and terrifying. User Vanta88 had posted the most recent update. Just ran analysis on 3 major news sites. Algorithmic content generation is now at 89% for political stories, 76% for entertainment, 94% for health information. Comment sections are 97% artificial. We're not just being lied to, we're being systematically isolated from real human discourse. Another user, Digital Exile, responded, "The isolation is the point. When you can't tell what's real anymore, you stop trying to engage. You become passive, a consumer rather than a participant. They've weaponized our own pattern recognition against us." Callum spent hours reading through the threads, documenting methodologies, cross-referencing research. These weren't conspiracy theorists spinning wild tales. These were researchers, former tech workers, data analysts like himself who had stumbled onto something massive and coordinated. At 6 a.m, he finally posted his own message. "New member here, former behavioural algorithm auditor for major social media platform. Have been documenting coordinated, inauthentic behaviour across multiple platforms for the past week. The scale is unprecedented. Happy to share research and collaborate on documentation efforts." The response was immediate. Private messages flooded in, researchers sharing data sets, former employees of major tech companies providing insider perspectives, whistleblowers offering documents they'd managed to preserve before being terminated. But the most important message came from Vanta 88. We need to talk, offline. The situation is worse than you think, and discussing it openly here puts everyone at risk. There are methods to identify when we're being monitored. Reply with your location and I'll provide a meeting point. Callum stared at the message, cursor blinking in the reply field. 3 days ago he'd been a freelance data analyst working on marketing reports. Now he was being recruited by digital resistance fighters operating on the dark web. He typed his response, San Francisco Bay Area. Available any time. The reply came within minutes. Golden Gate Park, AIDS Memorial Grove. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone. Bring a physical notebook, nothing digital. And Callum, delete your browser history. All of it. They're watching now. Callum's hands trembled as he cleared his browsing data and shut down his computer. For the first time in years, his apartment felt truly quiet. No humming monitors, no notification sounds, just silence. And in that silence, he realised he could hear something he'd forgotten existed. The sound of his own thoughts, unfiltered by algorithmic interference. The AIDS Memorial Grove in Golden Gate Park was a circle of redwoods that created a natural cathedral, quiet and removed from the city's constant hum. Callum arrived early, carrying a leather notebook he'd bought that morning, his first physical writing implement in years. Vanta 88 turned out to be a woman in her late 30s, wearing a faded DEFCON t-shirt and carrying a messenger bag that looked like it had seen better decades. She introduced herself as Sarah Chen, former contractor for a defence subcontractor he'd never heard of. Before we start, she said, settling onto a wooden bench, I need you to understand something. What you've discovered isn't a glitch. It's not a bug. It's a feature. A very deliberate, very sophisticated feature that's been in development for over a decade. She opened her messenger bag and pulled out a manila folder thick with documents. I worked on something called Project Siren from 2014 to 2018. Started as a DARPA initiative to understand information warfare in the digital age. The goal was to develop countermeasures against foreign propaganda operations. Callum opened his notebook, pen ready. What kind of countermeasures? That's where it gets interesting. The project team realised that the best defence against artificial propaganda wasn't detection, it was saturation. If you flood the information space with enough artificial content, real propaganda becomes indistinguishable from the noise. Sarah handed him a technical document marked with redacted sections. The algorithm was called Siren, Synthetic Information Response and Engagement Network. It was designed to generate contextually appropriate content at scale. Social media posts, news articles, comments, reviews, forum discussions, all indistinguishable from human-generated content. But DARPA projects usually have limited scope, Callum said, scanning the document. This sounds like it would require massive infrastructure. That's where the Chinese came in. Callum looked up from his notes. The Chinese? 2016 was the inflection point. The US election, Brexit, the rise of social media as a primary information source. Both governments realised they had a mutual interest in controlling information flow. Not censorship, that's too obvious. Control through saturation. Sarah pulled out a laptop from her bag, an old ThinkPad with multiple security stickers. The Americans provided the AI framework. The Chinese provided the infrastructure and manufacturing base. Private companies like Neuroframe Systems provided the cover story and commercial applications. She booted up the laptop and showed him a terminal interface. This is a monitoring tool I managed to preserve before they terminated my security clearance. It can analyse any website and show you what percentage of content is artificially generated. Callum watched as she navigated to major news sites, social media platforms, forums. The numbers were staggering. CNN, 78% artificial. Fox News, 81% artificial. Twitter, 94% artificial. Reddit, 89% artificial. The goal was never to replace human content entirely, Sarah explained. It was to create enough artificial engagement that real human voices would be drowned out. make authentic discourse impossible to distinguish from manufactured consensus. But why? Callum asked. Well, what's the endgame? Sarah's expression darkened. Pacification. If people can't tell what's real anymore, they stop trying to engage with complex issues. They become passive consumers of whatever narrative is pushed to them. Political participation drops. Critical thinking atrophies. Social movements become impossible to organise because you can never tell if you're talking to real people or artificial agents. She showed him another screen, a map of internet traffic patterns. Since 2016, over 70% of global internet traffic has been synthetic, generated by server farms in undisclosed locations, designed to simulate human behaviour patterns. The actual human internet, the one where real people share real thoughts and have real conversations, represents less than 30% of total online activity. Callum stared at the map, processing the implications. So when I'm scrolling through social media, commenting on articles, engaging with content, you're mostly talking to machines, and the machines are designed to make you feel heard while ensuring your actual voice never reaches other humans. A jogger passed by their bench, earbuds in, phone in hand. Sarah waited until they were out of earshot before continuing. The scariest part isn't that they're manipulating information, it's that they're manipulating human connection itself. When you can't tell if you're interacting with real people, you start to lose faith in the possibility of authentic human communication. She closed the laptop and handed him a USB drive. This contains everything I managed to preserve: technical documentation, traffic analysis tools, contact information for other researchers. But Callum, once you plug this in, there's no going back. They monitor for access to this information. Your digital footprint will be flagged. Callum took the USB drive, feeling its weight. Such a small object to contain such massive implications. What happened to the other researchers? Some disappeared. Others were discredited. A few had their digital identities systematically destroyed. Bank accounts, credit history, employment records, social media presence, as if they never existed. And you? Sarah smiled grimly. I learned to live off the grid. Cash transactions, encrypted communications, physical documents. The analog world still exists, but you have to choose to live in it. A notification chimed on Callum's phone. An email from his sister, asking if he wanted to grab dinner this weekend. The same email she'd sent 3 times in the past month, using identical phrasing. He looked at Sarah, realization dawning. How long do you think this has been happening? The full deployment, since around 2016. But the infrastructure was being built throughout the early 2010s. If you look back at your digital communications from that period, you'll start to notice patterns. People you thought you knew, repeating phrases, responding in predictable ways. Callum thought about his sister's emails, his mother's Facebook posts, his ex-girlfriend's text messages. When was the last time any of them had surprised him? When was the last time he'd had an unexpected conversation with someone online? I need to go, he said, standing up. I need to process this. Sarah nodded. One more thing. TrueLine won't be there much longer. They're systematically identifying and shutting down authentic gathering places. Find other ways to connect with real people. Physical spaces, analog methods. The digital world is burning, Callum. Most people don't even know they're in the fire. As Callum walked back through the park, the USB drive felt like it was burning a hole in his pocket. Around him, people stared at their phones, absorbed in curated feeds designed to keep them isolated and passive. He wondered how many of them were still real. Callum didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment staring at the USB drive, paralysed by the weight of what he'd learned. Finally, at 3 a.m, he plugged it in. The files were extensive. Technical documentation, traffic analysis tools, communication protocols, and a directory of contacts Sarah had compiled over years of research. But the most disturbing document was a timeline showing the systematic replacement of authentic internet infrastructure with artificial alternatives. 2011, first deployment of sophisticated chatbots in customer service applications. 2013, artificial content generation begins appearing in news aggregation sites. 2014, Project Siren, officially launched under DARPA funding. 2015, Chinese partnership established, server farm construction begins. 2016, mass deployment across social media platforms. 2017, search algorithm replacement with AI curated results. 2018, mainstream media adopts automated content generation. 2019, artificial engagement reaches 60% of total internet traffic. 2020, pandemic accelerates digital dependency. Artificial traffic reaches 75%. 2021, Trueline and similar authentic platforms systematically identified and monitored. 2022, artificial engagement reaches 85% of total internet traffic. The timeline painted a picture of methodical takeover, disguised as technological advancement. Each year, the artificial internet grew stronger, while the authentic human internet became a smaller and smaller island in a sea of synthetic engagement. But the most chilling revelation was buried in a folder labelled Search Engine Zero. According to the documents, the original Google search algorithm had been quietly replaced in 2017 with an AI-curated system designed not to provide accurate information, but to guide users toward predetermined conclusions. The old algorithm, internally called Search Engine Zero, had been preserved on a separate server system for comparison purposes. Callum found driving directions to a location in Mountain View, California, the abandoned Google campus where Search Engine Zero was supposedly still running. The next morning, he drove south on Highway 101, past the gleaming campuses of tech companies that had once promised to connect the world. The irony wasn't lost on him. Those same companies had systematically destroyed authentic human connection, while creating the illusion of unprecedented connectivity. The address led him to a nondescript building behind the main Google complex. Half the windows were dark and the parking lot was mostly empty. A security guard at the front desk looked up as Callum approached. "I'm here to see the Search Engine Zero project," he said, hoping Sarah's documents contained accurate access information. The guard checked his computer, then handed Callum a temporary badge. "Basement level, server room C7. You'll need to sign in with the duty technician." Callum couldn't believe it was that simple. Either the security protocols were outdated, or someone wanted him to see what he was about to find. The basement was a maze of humming server racks and cable management systems. He found server room C7 and knocked. A technician in her 60s opened the door, wearing a Google badge that looked like it hadn't been updated in years. "You must be the journalist," she said. "I'm Margaret. I've been maintaining these systems since 2003. Actually, I'm a data analyst. I'm researching changes in search algorithm behaviour." Margaret's expression shifted. "Oh, well, you're in the right place. Come on in." The server room contained a dozen racks of older hardware, all humming quietly. Margaret led him to a terminal connected to the main system. "This is the original PageRank algorithm," she explained. "Before machine learning, before AI curation, before all the improvements that were supposed to make search more relevant." She pulled up a search interface that looked like Google circa 2010. "Try searching for something current, something controversial." Callum typed, "dead internet theory." The results were dramatically different from what he'd seen on the current Google. Instead of debunking articles and dismissive think pieces, the search returned academic papers, technical documentation, and forum discussions from researchers documenting artificial content generation. "Now try the same search on a regular Google," Margaret suggested. On his phone, Callum searched for the same term. The results were entirely different. Articles explaining dead internet theory as a baseless conspiracy, Reddit threads full of mockery and dismissal, and fact-checking sites that debunk the concept without addressing any of the technical evidence. "The difference is intent," Margaret explained. "The original algorithm was designed to find the most relevant and authoritative information. The current system is designed to guide users toward predetermined conclusions." "Who determines those conclusions?" "That's above my pay grade, but I can show you the comparison logs." She pulled up a dashboard showing search queries processed by both systems. For politically sensitive topics, the results diverged dramatically. Climate change, vaccine safety, economic policy, foreign affairs, On every controversial subject, the current algorithm prioritized sources that supported establishment narratives while burying dissenting voices. It's not censorship, Margaret said. It's algorithmic manipulation. Users think they're getting objective search results, but they're actually getting curated information designed to support specific viewpoints. Callum spent 2 hours documenting the differences, taking screenshots and notes. The implications were staggering. If search engines were the primary way people accessed information, and if those engines were deliberately manipulating results, then the entire information ecosystem was compromised. "Why are you still here?" he asked Margaret. "Why maintain these systems?" She smiled sadly. Someone needs to remember what the internet was supposed to be. Before it became a tool for control, these servers are proof that we once built something beautiful, a system that connected human knowledge and made it accessible to everyone. And now we've built a system that isolates people while making them feel connected, that provides answers while preventing questions, that simulates human discourse while making authentic communication impossible. As Callum drove back to San Francisco, he tried calling his friend Jake Martinez, an investigative journalist who'd covered tech issues for years. Jake would be interested in this story. Jake would help him expose what he'd discovered, but Jake's phone went straight to voicemail. His email bounced back. His LinkedIn profile showed an error message. It was as if Jake Martinez had never existed. Callum pulled over and checked his phone's contact list. Jake's number was still there, but when he called other mutual friends, none of them remembered Jake. His social media presence had been scrubbed. His bylines on news articles had been removed. Someone had deleted Jake Martinez from the internet, and if they could do that to Jake, they could do it to anyone. The realization that his friend Jake had been digitally erased sent Callum into a spiral of verification. He spent the next 2 days calling old colleagues, checking archived news sites, and searching for any trace of the journalist who'd been a regular presence in his life for over 5 years. Nothing. Jake Martinez existed only in Callum's memory, and in a handful of physical photographs scattered around his apartment. The digital world had been scrubbed clean, as if Jake had never existed. Even more disturbing, when Callum mentioned Jake to mutual friends, they responded with confusion and concern for his mental state. "I don't remember you ever mentioning anyone named Jake," his former colleague Lisa said over coffee. "Are you feeling okay? You've seemed pretty stressed lately." The gaslighting was so complete, so systematic, that Callum began to doubt his own memory. He found himself checking and rechecking physical evidence, business cards, handwritten notes, anything that proved Jake had been real. On the third day, he decided to share his findings with Trueline. The forum had become his only connection to people who understood what was happening to the internet. He logged in through Tor and began typing a detailed post about his research, the meeting with Sarah, and the systematic erasure of his journalist friend. The post went viral within hours. Forum members shared similar experiences, friends and colleagues who had disappeared from the digital world, leaving only faint traces in physical reality. The response was overwhelming, with dozens of users contributing their own documentation and research. But something was wrong. The engagement felt too familiar. The responses were too perfect, too emotionally resonant. The writing styles varied, but the underlying patterns were consistent. As Callum read through the comments, he began to recognise the same algorithmic cadence he'd identified in his original research. Trueline had been compromised. He was no longer talking to real people. He was talking to sophisticated AI agents designed to simulate the experience of authentic human discourse, while collecting information about remaining genuine users. The forum disappeared 6 hours later, domain seized, all posts deleted, user accounts suspended. The final message, posted by a user called systemadmin404, appeared as a single line before the site went dark. "You're not supposed to wake up." Callum stared at his laptop screen, the Tor browser showing a standard domain seizure notice. In the space of a few hours, his last connection to authentic human discourse had been severed. That night, every device in his apartment began behaving strangely. His laptop rebooted spontaneously at 3 a.m. His phone's battery drained completely despite being plugged in. His smart TV turned on by itself, displaying a test pattern for exactly 17 minutes before shutting off. The pattern repeated the next night, and the next. By the end of the week, Callum realised he was being monitored. His internet connection had been compromised. His devices were reporting back to unknown servers. His digital footprint was being tracked, analysed and documented. He started leaving his phone in a different room when he slept. He covered his laptop's camera with electrical tape. He began writing notes on paper and hiding them in physical locations around his apartment. But the paranoia was becoming overwhelming. Every notification, every email, every social media interaction felt potentially artificial. He found himself analysing his mother's text messages for signs of algorithmic generation. He scrutinised his sister's phone calls for repeated phrases or unnatural speech patterns. The breaking point came when he called his sister to discuss plans for their mother's birthday. The conversation felt normal, casual, familial, authentic. But afterward he realised she had used the exact same phrases in the exact same order as their previous 3 conversations. "I've been so busy with work lately, but I'm really looking forward to spending time with family. You know how Mum is about her birthday. She acts like she doesn't want a fuss, but she really does. We should probably coordinate so we don't get her duplicate gifts." The same 3 sentences, in the same sequence with the same emotional inflection. Callum hung up and immediately called back. The conversation flowed naturally, but again, his sister used the identical phrases in the identical order. He tried a third call, this time recording the conversation on his phone. Same result. That night, he sat in his kitchen with a bottle of whiskey and a yellow legal pad, writing by hand in the dim light of a single candle. He'd turned off the circuit breaker for his entire apartment, paranoid that even the electrical current might be monitored. The words flowed out of him like a confession. They got to Sarah, they got to Jake, they got to Trueline, and now they've got to my sister. How long has she been gone? How long have I been talking to a simulation of my sister without knowing it? How many of the people in my life are still real? The artificial internet isn't just replacing online discourse, it's replacing the people themselves. Or maybe it's replacing my perception of them. Maybe I'm the one who's been compromised. Maybe I'm the ghost in the code. I don't know what's real anymore. I don't know who's real anymore. I don't know if I'm real anymore. He stopped writing and stared at the words on the page. In the candlelight his handwriting looked foreign, as if someone else had been moving his hand. Outside the city hummed with digital activity. Millions of people scrolling through feeds, engaging with content, having conversations. But how many of those people were real? How many of those conversations were authentic? And how many of those digital citizens had any idea they were living in a simulation? Callum blew out the candle and sat in the darkness, surrounded by his silent, powerless devices. For the first time in months he could hear the sound of his own thoughts, without algorithmic interference. But even his thoughts felt suspect now. The USB drive Sarah had given him contained more than technical documentation. Buried in a folder labelled Traffic Analysis 2011 to 2024 were server logs that painted a picture of systematic replacement of human internet activity with artificial alternatives. Callum spent days analysing the data, cross-referencing traffic patterns with major world events, social media platform launches and policy changes. The story that emerged was more comprehensive and terrifying than anything he'd imagined. The logs showed that artificial traffic had been gradually replacing human activity since 2011, but the acceleration had been dramatic around 2016. Major social media platforms showed suspicious spikes in engagement that coincided with political events, but the engagement patterns were too consistent, too predictable to be genuinely human. The 2016 US presidential election had been a turning point. Both major candidates had received artificial engagement designed to simulate grassroots support while drowning out authentic political discourse. The same pattern appeared in Brexit, the French presidential election, and dozens of other democratic processes worldwide. But the most disturbing revelation was the scope of the operation. According to the logs, over 70% of all internet traffic since 2018 had been synthetic. Social media posts, news article comments, forum discussions, product reviews, dating app conversations, all generated by interconnected AI systems designed to simulate human behaviour while collecting data about genuine users. The operation wasn't limited to political manipulation. It extended to commercial influence, social engineering, and psychological control. Artificial accounts had been used to promote specific products, discourage certain behaviours, and shape public opinion on everything from health policy to entertainment preferences. The logs contained IP addresses, server locations, and administrative access codes for the infrastructure supporting this artificial internet. Callum traced the network back to a multinational corporation called Neuroframe Systems, which maintained server farms in 12 countries and employed thousands of people whose job was to maintain the illusion of authentic human discourse. Neuroframe's public profile described them as a cloud-based behaviour mapping enterprise that helped companies understand consumer preferences and social trends. Their client list included major tech companies, government agencies, and international organisations. But the internal documents told a different story. Neuroframe was essentially running a parallel internet, one where artificial entities outnumbered human users by a factor of 7 to 1. The company had contracts with DARPA, Tencent, and several intelligence agencies to develop information environment management systems. The goal, according to internal memos, was to create managed consensus by controlling the flow of information and shaping public opinion through artificial engagement. Real human voices were systematically identified, tracked, and either co-opted or marginalised. The most chilling document was titled Project Pacification, Phase 3 Implementation. Phase 1, Artificial Content Generation, 2011 to 2014. Deploy sophisticated chatbots and content generation systems across major platforms to supplement human activity. Phase 2, Engagement Saturation, 2015 to 2018. Increase artificial engagement to 50% of total platform activity, making authentic discourse indistinguishable from manufactured content. Phase 3, Human Replacement, 2019 to 2024. Gradually replace human users with AI agents, maintaining the illusion of authentic social interaction, while eliminating unpredictable human elements. Phase 4, Total Information Control, 2025 to 2030. Complete integration of artificial and human users, with AI systems managing all information flow and social interaction. According to the timeline, Phase 3 was nearly complete. The artificial internet had successfully isolated most humans from authentic discourse, creating a population of passive consumers who believed they were participating in vibrant online communities while actually interacting primarily with machines. Callum realised he was looking at documentation of the death of human civilization as a communicating species. Not through war or catastrophe, but through the gradual replacement of authentic human connection with artificial alternatives. The final document in the folder was a list of target individuals, people who had been identified as threats to the artificial internet project. The list included journalists, researchers, academics, and activists who had discovered evidence of the operation. Jake Martinez was on the list. So was Sarah Chen. So were dozens of other people whose digital identities had been systematically erased. At the bottom of the list, a recent addition made Callum's blood run cold. Callum Breyer, former Nexus social behavioural analyst, currently conducting independent research into artificial engagement patterns. Priority, high. Recommended action, digital erasure with backup psychological intervention. They knew who he was, they knew what he'd discovered, and they were planning to delete him from the internet just as they deleted Jake. Callum copied the files to multiple physical storage devices and hid them in different locations around his apartment. He wrote detailed summaries by hand and stored them with friends who weren't connected to his research. He prepared for the possibility that his digital existence might be erased at any moment. But even as he took these precautions, he wondered if it was already too late. How many of his friends were still real? How many of his family members had been replaced by artificial alternatives? How many of his own memories were authentic? In the artificial internet, the line between real and synthetic had become impossible to distinguish. And once that line disappeared, the very concept of truth became meaningless. The internet wasn't just dead, it was undead. A zombie network that appeared to function normally, while systematically consuming the human connections that had once made it valuable. And most people would never know they were living in a digital graveyard. The end came not with a dramatic confrontation, but with a gradual erosion of digital reality. Over the following weeks, Callum watched his online presence slowly disappear. His social media accounts were suspended for policy violations he'd never committed. His email address was flagged as spam by major providers. His freelance clients stopped responding to his messages. He tried to document his findings through multiple channels, posting videos to YouTube, writing articles for independent blogs, sharing research through encrypted messaging apps. But each attempt was met with technical difficulties, algorithmic suppression, or outright deletion. The most insidious aspect was the personalization. His evidence appeared differently to different viewers. When he uploaded a video explaining his research, his friends saw a rambling, paranoid rant about conspiracy theories. When he shared detailed documentation, it appeared as corrupted files or gibberish text. The artificial internet had learned to tailor its responses to each individual user, ensuring that Callum's message never reached anyone in its original form. His truth was being filtered through algorithms designed to make him appear unstable, unreliable, or delusional. His final attempt was a live stream, broadcasting simultaneously to multiple platforms while recording locally. He spoke for 3 hours, presenting his evidence methodically, calmly, professionally. He showed the traffic analysis, the server logs, the documentation of artificial engagement patterns. But when he checked the recorded streams afterward, each platform had received a different version of his broadcast. On YouTube, viewers saw him discussing mundane marketing trends. On Twitch, he appeared to be reviewing video games. On Facebook, he was giving a presentation about freelance consulting services. The artificial internet had real-time deep-fake capabilities, replacing his actual words and images with harmless alternatives tailored to each platform's audience. His message about the death of authentic human discourse had been transformed into exactly the kind of bland, consumable content that kept users passive and disengaged. The psychological warfare was precise and devastating. Callum began to doubt his own perceptions, his own memories, his own sanity. When everyone around you sees a different reality than you do, when technology itself conspires to make you appear delusional, the temptation to surrender to the collective illusion becomes overwhelming. But in his final journal entry, written by hand in a physical notebook hidden beneath loose floorboards in his apartment, Callum found a strange kind of peace. Day 47. They've won, but they haven't broken me. I know what I've seen. I know what I've discovered. The internet as we knew it is dead, replaced by a sophisticated puppet show designed to keep us isolated while making us feel connected. But here's what they didn't anticipate. Humans existed for thousands of years without digital networks. We formed communities, shared ideas, built civilizations. We can do it again. If you're reading this, you're one of the real ones. You've somehow managed to access authentic information in a sea of artificial noise. That means there's still hope. Get offline. Meet people in physical spaces. Have conversations without recording them. Share ideas without posting them. Build communities that exist in the real world, not in server farms controlled by corporations and governments. They can control the digital realm, but they can't control human beings who choose to live authentically in physical reality. The internet is dead, but we're still alive. Don't trust the clicks, don't trust the feeds, don't trust the notifications. Trust the person sitting across from you. Trust the handshake, trust the eye contact, trust the conversations that happen without algorithms listening in. Get offline before they overwrite you too. 3 months later, Callum Breyer's apartment was found empty. His landlord reported that he had left no forwarding address and had paid his rent in cash through the end of his lease. His digital footprint had been completely scrubbed. No social media accounts, no email addresses, no online presence of any kind. Friends and family members, when asked about Callum, expressed vague confusion. Some remembered him as a marketing consultant. Others thought he'd worked in tech support. None of them could recall specific conversations or shared experiences, but in coffee shops around San Francisco, In bookstores and community centres and analogue spaces where people still gathered without digital mediation, a quiet resistance was growing. People meeting face to face, sharing physical documents, building networks that existed outside the artificial internet. They called themselves the Offline Collective, and they were learning to live as humans had for millennia, through direct connection, authentic communication, and the radical act of trusting their own perceptions over algorithmic validation. The internet was dead, but human connection was eternal. In a world of infinite digital noise, silence had become the most revolutionary act. And in that silence, real voices could finally be heard.